So, hi, Bob Lenz and Brandon Wiley. This is Allison and Benna, and we're interested in talking with you about your work with the new project that you're doing. And we'd like you to at least begin to just introduce yourselves and introduce the new project. You know, we're very much interested in project-based learning, and particularly in your high-quality standards that you're beginning to develop. Or not beginning to develop, but you have developed. So, Bob, would you mind getting us started, just giving us a briefing on what the project's all about?
Sure. Well, I'm the executive director for the Buck Institute for Education, and our vision is that all kids have access to high-quality project-based learning, no matter where they're from or what their background, because we believe it's a great way for kids to get both the academic content and skills they need, as well as success skills like critical thinking and collaboration and other habits of mind and dispositions, and including feeling like they're empowered to tackle the challenges in their lives in our world. And specifically what we do is build the capacity of teachers and school leaders and system leaders to implement high quality project-based learning. And we thought that it would be probably a pretty good idea to get some shared understanding of what high quality project-based learning actually is. And so we also felt like, because project-based learning is growing so rapidly, and the interest around the United States as well as across the world, that this was an exciting time, but it was also a little worrisome time. That without some agreement about what makes up a high quality experience for students, we might have lots of projects, but maybe not a lot of project-based learning. And so with support from the Project Management Institute Education Foundation and the Hewlett Foundation, we were able to convene a steering committee of experts in the field at all levels, from teachers and principals to policymakers and academics and support providers, and help us draft these criteria, which we've linked together in a framework. And then we spent a whole year getting input from an advisory panel of about 80 experts, as well as teachers and leaders who are experts as well, and actually doing the work. We posted it online. We had thousands of people give us input. And our first generation of criteria were more focused on the teacher aspect of project-based learning and not on the student experience. And that came up over and over again in the feedback that we had. So that really focused us in creating 6 criteria for high-quality project-based learning that describe the experience, and really set up a continuum through some guiding questions that teachers and leaders and even parents whose kids are doing project-based learning can ask themselves.
So, Bob, you said something I thought was intriguing, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you know, it really it was a question I was interested in. You said people are doing lots of projects, but not necessarily project-based learning. Yeah. What do you help us know a little bit more about what you mean by that? And Brandon, you may want to kick in on that because you go out in the field and see a lot of this work.
Go ahead, Brandon. Do you want to take that on?
Yeah, I think in many of the schools that we worked with around the country, one of the misconceptions is that projects are sort of this finite thing that you do at the end of learning. So the content has been taught, the learning has happened, and then we do a project, at best perhaps as a summative assessment. And so what we'd like to think of project-based learning is more of a sustained inquiry, that it is a place for students both to learn content knowledge and skills, but also develop those success skills that Bob mentioned, in addition to the content knowledge that we hope that they'll master. And so when it's done well, it's woven throughout the curriculum in various ways at various times during the year. In some schools are designed, are predicated around project-based learning, and everything that they do is based in projects. Others are more strategic about it, and they implement projects at different points in the year. But it's not an event. It's not something we do at the end of learning. It's something that it's how we do the learning.
Okay, that's very helpful because I know that people have that question. So, Bob, what you're trying to do in this project that you're talking about is really not only help to make that distinction between what's a project, meaning an episode or an event, and what's project-based learning, which is some systemic perspective on how we give students opportunities to learn from this way so that they can actually meet the more, I think it's probably the graduate profiles, the ways that we're trying to say, if we want the students to leave with this kind of perspective, how do we give them the practice? And so you're saying something about the idea that the quality of the practice really matters. And that's, I think, what your project is about. Is that right?
That's right, exactly. If you think about that graduate profile as the why we do project-based learning, at the Buck Institute, we would say how you do it is using gold standard project-based learning design elements and teaching elements. And the criteria and the framework describe what that quality student experience looks like and sounds like and feels like.
So Bob, you mentioned the dispositions and habits of mind right from the very beginning. And Brandon, I met you when I was really trying to see powerful examples of personalized learning way back many moons ago. I think it was about 6 or 7 years ago. And, you know, when you're starting to think about the connection between project-based learning and personalized learning, I think it would be really helpful for our community to hear some of the thoughts that you have about the synergistic relationship between the two.
Bob, do you want to go first or should I?
You go.
Okay, great. Well, I'll start with habits of mind and then I'll switch over to personalized learning if I might. I think there are a lot of natural synergies between the two. In particular, one of the elements in the high quality PBL framework is around collaboration, that students will collaborate not just with their colleagues in the classroom, but potentially experts in the field. When we think of collaboration, we oftentimes think that kids have to work in groups, but the reality is that not all projects actually have to be done in groups. It could be an individual project that a student is working on, but even in that individual project, they will likely have to collaborate with others. Again, whether it's experts in the field, their classroom teacher, other classmates at certain phases of the project. And so when I think of the habits of mind and thinking about being able to work with others and to think about your own thinking, what you need from others, thinking interdependently, there's some natural synergies there. One of the other elements is around project management. So I think of things like managing your impulsivity and having a plan for doing your work and knowing yourself as a learner. So there are some really natural, I think, connections between the two and dispositions that students will need to develop to be able to experience that type of learning if that is what's designed by the teacher. And I think in terms of personalized learning, one of the reasons for this framework, again, is because of quality. And what we've observed in the field is that as personalized learning becomes more of a buzzword that's being used, there isn't a common definition that we have found sufficient. In many cases, what unfortunately has happened is personalized learning has become students relegated to being in front of a computer, working through a set of playlist items that in essence are just a bunch of tasks online. They're not necessarily rigorous. They're not what we would consider to be project-based. And so what we're hoping is that in this framework, that it can also be applied to personalized learning settings where students really are working on projects that are of interest to them. So authenticity is another one of the elements of the framework, and engaging students in real world problems and questions so they have realistic ways to apply the content knowledge that they're learning. And to my mind, in a personalized learning, part of what you're tapping into are the students' interests, their passions, what their natural curiosities and questions are about the learning. And so to the extent that you're able to design projects that enable students to do those things, I think you're going to find that there are more opportunities to personalize, and it becomes more about the learning than it is about sort of the playlist that's been developed on the side.
And Bob, I mean, to follow up on what Brandon just described, how do you see in this kind of contemporary view about a misunderstanding around personalized learning as being relegated to a playlist and a one-to-one tech movement in conjunction with project-based learning, which requires to have learners slow down and engage in sustained inquiry. How are you helping as an institute help balance that approach, the idea of efficiency, but also sort of an opportunity to dive deeply into an inquiry or an investigation?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think that when working with teachers in schools, we're helping them build the design in such a way that you get to simultaneous outcomes, so that they're thinking about the work in a more complex way. But we're trying to do it using fairly straightforward and simple processes. It was one of the sort of foundation of the HQPBL framework, is that it needed to be simple. Our good friend at High Tech High, Rob Reardon, we like to quote him a lot when he said, like, simple tools lead to complex behaviors, and complex tools lead to simple behaviors. So we're trying to think about it in that way, so that teachers feel like they're getting a lot more bang for their buck when they're spending more time going deeper, so that they're seeing that they're actually meeting the multiple outcomes that they're striving to do. At the same time, I think that back to when we were talking before, what we find is that there's a disconnect between the graduate profile, or a lack of a graduate profile, often in these experiences. That usually, when I was at Envision schools, we used to talk about knowing, doing, and reflecting, and that a lot of the personalized learning is a lot about knowing through a playlist and regurgitating it back, but not a lot about the doing and the application and demonstration of the understanding, and the reflection and thinking about their growth and the metacognition. And so I think that's also a way for us to use project-based learning, and as described by the student experience in the framework, to help guide teachers in thinking more broadly about this experience, as well as the integration, because that's the other thing we see is, oh, we do personalized learning. The kids have the playlist in the morning, and then we do projects in the afternoon. But often we see the projects look more like a different type of playlist.
So what they're really doing is they're using the playlist for developing skills, and then they're getting them into projects. But the question that you're raising very powerfully is, so are the projects worthy of their attention? Are they really going to deepen their learning, or are they just another set of superficial activities, or not even superficial, but just activities, but not activities that are going to lead them toward what we claim we would like them to be able to do, which is live in an ambiguous, volatile, complex, uncertain world. You know, I think we're all feeling that, and we're all feeling the need for that deeper learning. So as you brought people together to think about this question, how is your project really identifying and describing what might be not just the gold standard, but what might be the way for us to really begin to think about these questions in a deeper way as a system?
Well, I'll start on that one, and then I think the way we've been thinking about this work has really been from a systemic approach. And as Bob mentioned earlier on, thinking about at the teacher level, to what extent are we building the teacher's capacity to design or adapt high quality projects and implement them well with their students. But what we find very often is that even when teachers spend a lot of energy and get better at working with projects, sometimes the systems around them don't really help them. So we've also increasingly realized that at the school level, it's really incumbent upon us to work with school leaders to think about how they can create the conditions and the structures that enable this type of learning and that they don't impede it. And then at the systems level, we're helping to think about coherence. So to what extent does this type of learning work with all the other things, what I like to think of as an ecosystem around the schools, whether that be policy, whether that be structural things at the district level. But if these things are not in concert and aligned, it makes it really hard for teachers to actually have the courage to do some of this work and to step out of what they might be held accountable for, or to work in a master schedule that doesn't allow for blocks of time for learning, it doesn't allow for collaboration across the school. So, we've really been thinking about it on these three levels, and to what extent we as an organization can support schools, teachers, and the system to think about this work. And I think what you'll find when you look at the framework is that it was designed very purposefully to be used as a reflective tool, specifically for teachers. So as you look at each of the elements, they're accompanied by a set of questions that ask them to reflect on to what extent do these types of learning experiences exist for their students in the projects. And our hope is that ultimately students will also be able to use those questions as a reflective tool, and at times perhaps even calibrate with their teachers about the learning that they're experiencing.
So what you're suggesting is that this tool that is a part of the new project would really allow people to look at both the micro level, in other words, how is it affecting me? And then also at an instructional level, how is it also affecting the kind of instruction that I'm doing? And then at a macro level, which is not only how much is it affecting what I'm doing, but how much are the policies, the environment, the structures of the schools and the district district policies really allowing us to do this work and do it in a deeper and more meaningful way.
And that's the idea that Benna and Art and I have been playing out as an idea in our session today, is the notion that classroom teachers are also systems thinkers. So as you're starting to continue to play out the idea of the high quality PBL model, how do you help classroom teachers sort of have a stake or a voice in the types of policies and practices that are above their locus of control at some point, but to start going after the synergy between that classroom level and the macro level?
Well, at the Buck Institute for Education, when we work with a school district, as Brandon was saying, we work at the district level, and often that's a team that has multiple stakeholders in it. So ideally, there's teacher voice there as well. And then as we work with the school teams to put the conditions in place, those are teams that are made up of leaders with teacher leaders as well. And so we found that it wasn't as effective enough just to build the capacity of a principal or even the principal and the assistant principal, that really you needed to have the team looking at clear on our vision and our purpose, or the culture and structures we want to put in place. How are we going to go about building capacity? And what evidence are we going to use over the multiple years it's going to take to do this to continuously improve? And so we think that's a really a powerful and integrated way to bring that teacher voice in so that ultimately you're building that sense of coherence. The other thing on the systems work where we see it really effective is when the assessment system in the school or the district is aligned with the graduate profile and really makes a clear case for why you're doing project-based learning. And often that then looks like a portfolio and a presentation of learning where students are making the case that they've demonstrated that both the academics and the success skills and their mindsets through work that they've curated and reflected on and are presenting publicly. And I don't know that there's anything that gets more personalized than that type of experience. And so when we think, when I think of personalized learning, and I really enjoyed reading your book because it was like, that's right, that's what personalized learning is about.
Yay! There's a reason why we're interviewing you, Bob.
Yes.
So this is great, and it's so helpful for people. I'd like you to, just as a way of closing on this interview, I'd like you to please talk about a couple of things that I know, which is one, that this is open source, that you're not really doing this as Buck Institute, you're really doing it as open source. Could you talk a little bit about what you're hoping to inspire and how people can join with you? And then, as you know, we're going to put this up on our websites, and we're going to make sure that people begin to know more and more about what it is you're trying to do.
Excellent. Brandon, you want to take that? Or you want me to?
Why don't you go ahead?
Okay. Well, just as you stated, Benna, this is a process facilitated by the Buck Institute for Education. One of our strategic aims is to be the standard bearer for high quality project-based learning. So we facilitated the process, but we were purposeful in having the broader community help us come to consensus. It now lives at hqpbl.org, where the framework is there. There's a white paper that gives a great link to all to the research and evidence that exists to make the case for the framework, as well as case studies of schools exemplifying different aspects of the criteria, as well as videos. And there, at that place, there's a place for people to commit to using high quality project-based learning. And so our hope is that close to 1 million people over the next 2 years will commit to using high quality project-based learning. And over 500 organizations that are support organizations, schools, universities will likewise commit to using this framework in their practice.
So it's very exciting that you're trying to pull together all of us, because I think we have so much in common, and yet we all seem as if we're autonomously working. Yes. And it's just great to see a nice synthesis of all this work, and to continue to invite us to co-create with you. So we appreciate that very, very much.
And we're thrilled to be thought partners and partners actually on the high quality PBL. So I think this level of a continued synergy, not just in this interview, but also further connections around ideas that some members of our Learning, Personalized, and Habits of Mind community may have for you to think through as a follow-up conversation.
That's great. And we see this as really just the beginning, and that the website as the hub, but maybe there'll be other ways to share resources, examples, because we were really clear. I think we have a lot of consensus on the why. We're gaining consensus on what it looks like. And we think that there's multiple ways and some of how you can build capacity and teachers can provide these experiences for kids. And so we want to make sure that that is not, that we have a rich array of resources and opportunities. So we look forward to that partnership.
Well, thank you. We have been all at it for a while. I think all of us have the hope, the aspiration, the desire. So it's just great for us all to be together. So thank you so much. And thank you for giving us some time today. I know it's a busy, busy time for everybody.
Thank you. Well, thank you.